York Film Festival. I'm Devika Girish, I'm the editor of Film Comment, and I program the talk section of the New York Film Festival with my colleague Madeline Whittle. We're very thrilled to have you all join us for the second talk of the festival and one of the talks we've been most excited about. Before I get to introducing today's special guests, I would like to thank our board, patrons, members, partners, sponsors, and of course all of you, our dedicated moviegoers who make what we do at Film at Lincoln Center possible. As you know, FLC is a nonprofit. It relies on your support. So if you're not a member already, please consider becoming one today. There's a lot that comes with membership, access to screenings and a lot of perks, discounts, and an amazing community of dedicated cinephiles. What's not to love? So check out all about our membership program at filmlink.org/membership. While you're online, follow us on X, Instagram, and also follow our newsletter where there'll be updates posted about added screenings and tickets and giveaways and all of that fun stuff at the New York Film Festival. I also want to do a special thank you to HBO, which is the presenting partner of all NYFF talks and helps make this program possible. And also just a quick shout out to our amazing theater staff, volunteers, all the NYFF workers who run the festival, who think of all the little things like these beautiful real bottle holders. I'm obsessed. Coming to today's talk, this is part of our roundtable series of talks where we bring together different filmmakers, artists, as well as other commentators from film culture together to ponder, to reflect on certain themes and trends that we trace across the NYFF lineup. And this year, there were three filmmakers who really stood out to us and seemed sort of connected. They were Yeo Sora, the director of Happyend. Yeo Siew Hua, the director of Stranger Eyes. And Trung Minh Ki, the director of Vietnam, who unfortunately is not here because his flight got delayed. So, but we will still clap for him. All three of them, their films are playing for the first time. They're in the NYFF Main Slate for the first time. They are, newer emerging directors, as we like to say, but who already feel like they have the confidence and the sort of command of auteurs. Each of their films represents Asia and their particular part of Asia in really exciting new ways. And also, all three have a really sharp, politically adventurous, as well as formally audacious approach to filmmaking. So it seemed like a no-brainer to bring them together. Again, Key is not here, but we will assume he is in spirit. And I'm really thrilled that to moderate today's conversation, we have Kevin Lozano with us. He is the Associate Literary Editor of The Nation, a fantastic writer, and I know that he has a lot of interesting things to say about the two films, including the role of DJing in them, if you've seen it. So, without further ado, let me invite on stage Yeo Siew Hua and Kevin.
This is really cool.
It is very cool. All right, should we just get started, guys?
Sure.
Well, maybe we should start with the question that Devika teed up for us, but I want to talk about DJing in your movies. I think your films have the best scenes of live DJing that I've seen in contemporary films in some time. It's not hackneyed, they're funny, but also heartfelt. In Stranger Eyes, there is this amazing scene of a live stream DJ set with like lots of props, but it also is like one of the ways in which the movie engages with voyeurism, and then DJing in Happyend is kind of integral to the community of the teenagers in the high school. So wondering if you guys could talk about music and also electronic music at the start of this.
Actually, I have a question. Did your actor already know how to DJ, or?
No. She didn't know how to DJ, although she was very interested to know. So it was kind of the perfect moment for her to learn. I mean, she didn't have to compose the whole thing, so she had to act like she knew. But I think she had a lot of DJ friends and stuff like this. So, I mean, you know, this element of having electronic DJ music, it's I don't know, something to do with what's going on in the youth culture, especially around myself and the community I'm around. Yeah, it's you know, the technologies and everything that has been making it possible, and a lot of people are taking on to doing it their own, right? And having a platform. But I think ultimately it was more about like, how do we have a voice, right? How do we find our own platform? And in my film, the character of the younger girl, she DJs, and because in a way, that is her voice, right? And if you've seen the film, there's a sort of a voyeur who's looking at her from across the window, and then onto the screen. So for me, it was kind of like interesting that this older guy who's sort of stalking her turned from a voyeur into a viewer in a matter of like 10 seconds, right? So that's, you know, for me, you know, playing around with, if you've seen the film, it has this kind of idea about like seeing and being seen, and what sort of makes a voyeur, but at the same time aren't in a way we all are in that way, like again through our social media. So yeah, the DJ element became for me like what's that platform that she is on, that she's trying to find a voice for herself.
I mean, there's a bunch of DJs in my film. The main one is obviously the first cameo by this DJ, Yosuke Yukimatsu, who's, I personally think he's like one of the best DJs like alive, probably, maybe ever. He's like, I've been a huge fan of his for such a long time. I was watching him on like YouTube and stuff like that, and then in Japan I had the opportunity to go see one of his live shows. And I'm pretty shy, so I don't really go up to people that often, but my really outgoing friend kind of started talking to him and introduced me and stuff like that, and then we started to get along. Turns out he's a huge cinephile too. And after that point, in Japan, in Tokyo, whenever I would go see like an Eric Romer film or a Ho Sha-shen film or something, he would kind of always be there in the audience. And through that, we became closer friends, and I wrote him into my script as this legendary DJ that these high school kids are admiring. Later on, there's also like a music store owner who DJs in the store, and she's just an actress, but we taught her how to DJ in like a day.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
She looks really good DJing.
Yeah, she did a great job. And then obviously the two boys who DJ in their kind of music research club. They didn't know how to DJ before, but we kind of sent them through a great lesson. And fortunately, our AD is really into club culture. He knows kind of how to DJ a little bit too, so it kind of taught them. So yeah, I guess that's how it appears in the film. But for me personally, you know, I love techno music. I love the like sound of the subwoofer, and because the film has so much to do with rumbling and earthquakes, it kind of seemed to make a lot of sense to combine that with these rumbling sounds of techno.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, now that you mentioned Ho Sha-shen, wasn't Millennium Mango full of DJ too?
Yeah,
It's like,
yes.
you know, it's just part of a tradition.
I think so.
It's like maybe in Asian cinema, like the kind of like underground DJ, it's actually tapped a little bit more into the underground, to the subversive. Maybe, you know, in the West, is DJ is just DJ, whereas maybe, yeah, where we come from, you know, the DJ scene is yeah, it's not as sort of mainstream, or at least the kind of DJs that we've been looking at. Yeah, it's tapped into something else that is in the underground, and maybe that's something interesting.
One thing I was responding to in kind of thinking about the club sequences in my film was the lack of good club sequences in Japanese cinema. And I don't want to hate on any other movies, but I have, you know, in all the kind of contemporary Japanese cinema that I've watched, I have yet to come across a club scene that I've been really convinced by, and given me the feeling of like the clubs that I go to and I like. And so it was really important for me to like make sure that the club scene in the film like really felt like something that I would want to go to, you know, and enjoy. So hopefully we achieve that.
I wanted to start with like the active listening because it seems less immediate in your films, which is all about being watched. So in fact, because the movies are all about surveillance, at least when I was watching them, I thought a lot about kind of the oral qualities and like what you could listen to rather than look at. So I was wondering if you guys could talk about that sort of shared theme of surveillance in your films. You approach them with similar political nuances. There's considerations of class and race and the way in like which all of that is mediated by being watched all the time. So I was wondering if you guys could sort of talk about that central component of both films.
I feel like crucially the surveillance in Happyend doesn't have a person watching it, but it's a computer, and it's like an AI system that kind of a fictional but definitely real AI system that just arbitrarily or seemingly arbitrarily categorizes certain actions as like worthy of demerit. So I feel like that is actually kind of a key difference between Stranger Eyes and Happyend, because I think what's most important about Stranger Eyes is that there is somebody who's actually watching the feed. And it's the act of observing and being observed, like the scene, and observing that really kind of seems to be the key in the crux of your film. But I think the kind of premise of having surveillance and how that affects these characters as like a omnipotent sort of viewer that creates this power dynamic between the like state or authority and the people being observed, where it forces the observed to have to control themselves and police themselves, even without having like a hand of authority actually doing the punishing, which is clearly like shows very well in Stranger Eyes as well. But I don't know.
I mean, yeah. In Stranger Eyes, the film is very much about surveillance. I mean, and how should I put it? But in a way, that's also the device. You know, that's the device of the framing of it. But I mean, what I also really wanted to explore through surveillance is really the sort of the act of seeing and being seen. So I think it was it's important for me to bring out that level over and beyond the complications of or the power relations of surveillance, which is also very important. Yeah. It's I mean, living in Singapore, that's the situation, right? Like, you live in this state of surveillance so much that it is absolutely internalized, right? So whether you pretend to forget it or you forget it momentarily, but some back of your head, it's there. So, and maybe that's when it gets the scariest. It's like you no longer remember, but that you actually are thinking about it. And I think that's kind of the state of what I was trying to explore, which begins with seeing actually someone looking at the camera, but of like the surveillance footage. But maybe again, for those who have seen the film, later on you have a lot. You no longer see anyone looking at the frame anymore, and we just look, and we the audience are just sort of looking at the frame. It also becomes something like an omnipresent or ubiquitous kind of situation, except that by that point, on some level, the audience is also the one doing this kind of omnipresent watching throughout the film. So I guess that is the sort of device that I was working with.
I was listening to an interview you did, I can't remember which film festival. You were talking about how the film is also meditating on how we've become images ourselves, and in fact so much of human sociality is mediated by yourself being a picture, and I was wondering if you could talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, for sure, because talking about being on a DJ, becoming having viewers, that's our existence now, right? Increasingly more so, I'm feeling like our image has become more real than who we are, the kind of image that we put up to be liked and followed and subscribed and all these things. To exist is to be seen. But at the same time, of course, again, there are power relations, who has access and who has power to that image, right? But it is a fact that all our relationships, romantic or otherwise, they are actually through a mediation now that is strongly image-based. It is interconnected through technologies. We no longer have relationships that have no technology involved in a way, right? And with that, the image of ourselves are really important. So we are becoming more so. I'm feeling if I look at an image of myself, it might even tell me a lot more than what I think I know of myself sometimes.
I was really impressed by how in Stranger Eyes, it's just, because obviously you're framing an aspect of reality which includes our phones and these digital frames and screens. And in my film, I actually shied away from showing phone screens, mainly because I haven't figured out how to make phone screens cinematic, but you seem to have figured it out. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, because I've seen so many different renditions of people getting text messages and how that shows up on screen, and sometimes it's like an intertitle. I remember, I think it was Drive By Car or something, it just kind of shows up on a wide shot of just the text, but you kind of know that it's a text that he receives or an email. But you don't really shy away from actually just showing the screen itself, and somehow it still totally works and is very cinematic, and there's a lot of layers of action happening that's in-person action, but then also text-based action or screen-based action. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, because I hadn't figured it out.
No, interesting, because of course we would have had a discussion about how to show these things, and for me it's we need to show it as a phone screen, in its very form, because the tactility of this phone is really important to this sort of mediation that we're talking about. There is a moment where the guy is texting, this girl, and she's not replying, right? And there's like typing ...
Yeah, the typing ... is such a cinematic thing. It's so much suspense.
Yeah, you're just holding the phone and you're just staring at the phone. It was just like, in some ways, 80% of our time, this is what we're doing. We're like staring at the phone for the typing ... More than actually text. Like we know what we're gonna say really fast. We're just waiting for the typing ... to finish, and then we will type the next message really fast. So like all of that experience for me is really important in the whole construction of how we are dealing with technology. And for now, I mean, soon enough, we don't even need a phone, So give it a few years, maybe all the typing ... is already a chip inserted into our, fingernail or something, like who knows, right? But, for now, the screen mediation and the tactility of what is already no longer buttons, really important. Yeah, and so we decided, no, we're gonna shoot it as it is. After all, so you have text, and now the text is visual, and at the same time, someone else is talking, and that's how kids are, having dinners now, right? Like they have like 3 screens, and talking to their parents at the same time. Yeah, the level of information flow is on a whole different level.
Yeah, I've been to I peeked into a screening of one of my films one time. There were some Gen Z audience members who were like watching the film and taking notes at the same time and still like reacting to what was going on in the movie, like while they were typing on their phones.
Yeah,
I was very impressed.
At least they're taking notes.
Yeah.
You're lucky that they're taking notes.
Yeah, I mean, just the amount of information processing that can happen now, just because we're so used to multitasking, is pretty impressive.
So I was wondering if we could pull back a bit and talk about your guys' influences, because both of these movies are very capacious and they draw from this, like, I feel like cosmopolitan tradition of like lots of different films. I see like Edward Yang and Akira in your film, and I see Michael Haneke in your film, but those are my kind of subjective readings, but I'm wondering who you were returning to when you were kind of crafting your specific vernaculars, because you both like create the worlds of your films in such unique ways.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's maybe it wears it on its sleeve a little too much, but I love Edward Yang so much, and I think he's sort of achieved just kind of like a film language of how to frame urban environments in a way that I feel like nobody else has. And when my cinematographer and I were just thinking about how to shoot it, we were always just being like, all right, Uncle Yang, like, what would you do? But for the film, it wasn't just trying to like copy his language or anything like that. It was very much informed by our thought of needing to put the focus as much on the urban environment that the characters are set in, as well as the characters themselves in an equal way. So, we would use our lens choices and our lens settings would be like deep focus, for example, so that all of it is in focus. And that was informed mainly by the idea that one of my characters in the film, Ko, like his political awakening kind of sets the drama forward, sets the drama off in the film. And so in order to depict that political awakening, we needed to depict society that influences that awakening. And so that's kind of the reasoning behind shooting it the way we did. But you're right, Edward Yang I love very much, of course. Who doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen Edward Yang's film, it's in your psyche somehow, right? And I would say the same, that like you pointed out Haneke, and there's like an obvious homage to Rear Window in my film, right? And so for me it's like I think I was saying this in the Q&A yesterday, that like I had an idea of this film, and then when I started pitching the film, I started to hear a lot of different people telling me, this film is like Cachet, or like David Lynch's what was it, Lost Highway, or because there's that video element, and I'm like, interesting. I haven't seen Haneke's film. I was like very embarrassed. I haven't seen, but I was pretending like, yes, it is. It's exactly that. Yeah, no. Can you give me the money to make it? It's like a Haneke film. No, okay. So yeah, later on I went to see the film. So I went to do my homework. But yeah. So but what I got out of all of this for me was that of course, because cinema has such a long tradition of voyeuristic movies, about voyeurism and surveillance. It's like it's the constant obsession of cinema, right? And then I realized what I'm doing is just adding to that conversation, is in that very long tradition of seeing something either you're not, most of the time you're not supposed to, and sometimes you can't unsee it, right? And maybe that's the bigger dilemma, you want to unsee something but you cannot, right? So it's definitely part of that tradition of films that I've been making. It's hard to say, because I don't think I threw my cinematographer or my collaborators here's a film that we need to copy it. I mean, it was just all the films that we have all seen, and then we try to come up with a language that is most consistent with the film that we are trying to create. And I think you were talking about using very sort of deep focus for your films. Meanwhile, for us, we were trying to narrow down the focus, because I think for us it was very important the subjectivity of who is watching what, and we were playing around a lot, of course, with the lensing, the zoom lensings, and also the focus, which is a sort of a shallower focus than rather than a deep focus. So in a way, we are doing both our films are on surveillance, but then at the same time we sort of sought our own visual language to go about it.
Yeah, there's surveillance, of course, comes into play in a really strong way in Happyend. But I think, whereas I feel like your film very much starts with the idea of surveillance and then develops off of that, and kind of explores the nuance of seeing and unseeing and kind of wanting to be seen. Mine kind of takes more of a approach of surveillance as state control. And for me, the backdrop of why I incorporated that into the film very much comes from kind of my, read or analysis of Japanese imperial history or colonial history. So the film Happyend is one of the starting points of how I was thinking about Happyend goes back to 1923. There was a really big earthquake in Japan, and it resulted in the massacre of Zainichi Koreans, where about 6,000 or more people were killed by Japanese vigilantes, and that was spurred on by both government bureaucrats, but also Japanese police officers who were spreading rumors that these Koreans were acting violent or poisoning the wells or something. And then these Japanese kind of vigilante bands sort of came together and started massacring people. So it's a really horrible part of Japanese colonial history, because I think there was a lot of resentment built up within Japanese people towards these workers, Korean workers who came to Japan or were forced to come. And interestingly, so that, in 1945, when World War II ended and this Japanese kind of imperial era ended, the final law that the Japanese emperor imposed upon its citizens was the Foreigner Registration Act. And so these former kind of colonial subjects of Koreans and Chinese people and Manchurians had to all register as foreigners now. And the organizational government body that now had the task of controlling immigration flow is completely connected to immigration control in Japan now that has a lot of horrible human rights abuse issues. And state surveillance very much is related to, I mean, almost the point of state surveillance now is like to control the porousness of their borders, right, of coming in and out. And so that's the extension of why I incorporated surveillance in my film, because thinking through the trajectory of that like kind of nation state as this maintaining of the border and how that relates to immigration control, and how that kind of categorizes people as foreigners or not foreigners. Like that was sort of what I was exploring through my use of surveillance.
So this event is called New Asian Auteurs, right? I think that's what it's called. I find the term auteur, it has a lot of baggage, but at least like when I think of it in a positive term, I think of like Serge Denis, people talking about the kind of revolutionary potential of film, or at least like the kind of director as a person who intervenes in like the kind of politics of the day. I think both of your films do that in really, really interesting ways. You're talking about borders and colonial history. Your film is concerning people who are completely paralyzed by the state and like don't know where to turn, therefore they start watching each other. So this is perhaps a broad question, but since we've already begun this kind of political discussion in your work, I was wondering if we could have a sort of larger discussion of I don't know, your politics as directors and also where you see your work in that. It's a very broad question, obviously.
Do you want to
I don't know. I mean, my previous film was also something to do with the conditions of the migrant workers in Singapore, and which is poor, and sort of the state of exploitation they're in, and I don't know. I mean, sometimes you know, some people would, you know, make you feel like you're an activist, but I don't know. I mean, I feel you know, I'm a stranger, an imposter about this, right? You know, it's like I make films. I mean, a lot of the work of what the activists are doing, like I'm taking off that, right, to develop a work that that I can tell through cinema. And for me, you know, the important groundwork of all the statistics, of all the like call to action and all of that has been done by very important blood and sweat people who are working on the ground about this. And for me, like, you know, as a filmmaker, I'm trying to use what I think is maybe an empathetical platform like cinema, and a very embodied, empathetical medium to resonate, you know, to create resonances, and you know, sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. I mean, at the end of the day, cinema is literature rather than, you know, it's not me going out with flamethrowers, you know, yeah. But for me, it's about, like, at the end of the day, what I'm deeply concerned about, and I can't make a film that I'm not concerned about, right? So I think tapping into things that I'm really concerned about, that's just a natural state for me. And the films speak of something, and you know, it has a position, and it has something that relates, and then at the end the rest is really up to the audience, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I have kind of a similar outlook on how politics and cinema relates. I mean, I think I've been getting a lot of, doing a lot of interviews in Japan, and because the film is going to come out pretty soon. But a lot of people have been asking me, like, so what's like the message you're trying to promote? Like, can you tell me what the message is? Like, it seems to be like such a strong political message you're trying to get out there. I'm like, no, not really at all. Like, there's no message that I'm trying to kind of like use the film as a medium for. It's just like kind of what Siew Hua was saying. For me, it's almost more like journalistic, where I had extremely strong emotional feelings in my own personal life, like in my early 20s, and in a way I kind of want to remember those feelings, and so I think fiction is a pretty good way to also record these slightly more abstract, like ambivalent, like ambient emotions, and I also happen to be thinking a lot about politics as well. And so those kinds of things ultimately do make it into the film, but it's not as if I'm trying to like promote like, communism or something like that. So yeah, and I think we as filmmakers have a responsibility outside of the film that we make to be political agents of politics and just have our own commitments and be diligent in our own ways. But I don't necessarily think you always need to do that through films, and I also don't think you can do that without making it into propaganda to some degree. Yeah.
So we are missing one of the filmmakers in this panel, and I'd be remiss not to mention Vietnam, which I think is a really amazing movie. It's really good. It's like so beautiful. I was wondering if you guys, now you've both watched it, I'm assuming, I was wondering if we should talk about it, just to give a boost to it. It's such a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I love the film. If anyone hasn't seen it, like, please go watch it. It's so beautiful. I wish I knew a little bit more about Vietnamese history, because I feel like I would have picked up a lot more things about it, but even without that, the imagery and the sound and just everything about it was just so beautiful. And I really felt, when I heard that I was being invited to do this talk, I was like, oh, what, I don't even know how my film will compare to Vietnam, but in thinking about it, I was reading that the two characters, Vietnam, one of them has a northern Vietnamese accent, the other one has a southern Vietnamese accent, and although the filmmaker didn't really intend that to like represent the north and south of Vietnam necessarily, it could also be read that way. And I found that very interesting, because in a way, for Happyend as well, like the characters do embody and represent the kind of, I guess, the confrontation of nations and the contradictions of Japanese colonialism through the characters as well. So in that way, I sort of felt, a little familiar. And yeah, it's. I think the director is also 33 or something. It's my age, and although I didn't, live through any of this history that I was reading and interrogating, there was some degree of responsibility that, as a Japanese person, I felt towards the history of colonialism in Japan, that Japan enacted in, in all of the big part of Asia. And obviously, I don't have a responsibility necessarily towards that, but in a way I also do have a responsibility to like engage with it and come face to face with it, and I feel like that's sort of what Vietnam was doing as well.
What do you think?
It's an extremely beautiful film. The same I would say. Go see it if you haven't. And it's very fraught, kind of like tender, exploration into trauma, right? The national trauma that is also like superimposed onto the trauma of it's almost like an intergenerational trauma of the family, and also of the relationship between the two coal miners, and it's really tender, and it's very powerful in that way. And I mean, maybe coming from Southeast Asia myself, there is it sort of runs through our regional history in that way. This trauma, these kind of nation building years, right? That I think a lot of us, Southeast Asia and in the larger Asia, we've been grappling with these traumas. I mean, I say traumas because it is a historical scarring that has happened, before, right? And the kind of repercussions that it just comes back again and again in our cinema that we see in the filmmakers of my generation, right? And also before, but maybe the filmmakers from the generation before mine, they were some of them were like in the heat of it, right? They were in pure physical danger, some of them were, so their filmmaking, it's that there's blood, it is life-threatening on many levels, right? While maybe my generation now, we are trying to, we're rediscovering, we're rehistoricizing, we're trying to reconcile and try to understand what has come to pass and how we are the way we are because of what happened. So I think, maybe seen through a generation of the filmmakers and again of that region talking about the trauma, it's something. It's a not ongoing, but it's a sort of a transcendental theme across many of us that I see. Trauma and key, being a case in point.
So I think we're going to open it up to the audience. All right.
Do we need to wait for Mark?
Actually, what do we
Yeah,
want to do?
there's a mic over there. Come down.
Okay. Thank you.
Expect that me.
It's the port's too short.
It's over there.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, very good, thank you. Is it on?
Yeah.
Hello? Okay, well, I'm not sure if it's on or not.
I'm not sure either.
But in any case, both of your films were interesting also in another regard, besides surveillance and all this, and that is the level of alienation that each film has a key or several key characters that feel particularly alienated from their own society and alienated in some general way. And so I felt your films were a lot about alienation. I've seen both of them, and I think they both deal with the subject in very different but complementary ways. So I thought maybe you could comment on that idea of how you address alienation, especially there's all these changes in Japan with alienation and individuals within that society, works. There's a pressure to fit in and all this and that, and then this guy's definitely not conforming.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Japan, I feel like it really comes down to this like myth that the Japanese nation state has really promoted, which is like this existence of the Japanese person, like the Japanese identity, and which fundamentally is like undefinable other than having a Japanese nationality or citizenship. And one of the reasons why I wanted to portray a very diverse Japan is because that is the Japan that I see on a daily basis, but you don't really see the media that much, I think. There are Black Japanese people, right? There are Brazilian Japanese people, and it's just the fabric of it's like, that's just the people like that exist. And but a lot of times, like even if you were born there, and even if you're like second generation, third generation, sometimes if you don't look it, you're not considered Japanese, and therefore even though you have like way more than me, for example, because I was born in New York. But even if there are people who have been living in Japan for like 2 generations, if they just look completely not Japanese or whatever that means, like a lot of people do feel alienated within the society. And so, yeah, I don't know how to respond to that, I guess, but other than saying that.
Well, you clearly showed their feelings of alienation profoundly.
Yeah, and to show it in a really like normal way, I suppose, like without calling too much attention to it, that was kind of important to me.
But it's an observation, right? That like we see a lot of Asian films, and alienation and like loneliness and alienation is very much part of like running through across, right? It's like some kind of bloodline that sort of runs across it, and it's interesting to think why. I mean, surely for us as filmmakers, we are saying that it's something that we felt of the character, so we wrote it in, you know. But at the same time, you know, we can also ask the question like why, you know. I mean, I know for a fact that in Asia, you know, the it's probably where there's most laws against congregations of people. It's, you know, the organizing of people for, you know, collective action many times are illegal also, right? Like maybe there is something in place that is promoting the alienation of us, and that you know, the bizarre contradiction is also that like you know the famous thing that like, oh, Asians is a very collectivist or very communitarian kind of society. It's true. I mean, you know, on many levels it's true, but at the same time super alienated towards itself too. Again, I'm generalizing here, right? But I'm giving kind of like a broad stroke discussion about what I'm sort of seeing here. It's like in my film, I remember one of the funny comments. My film was edited by a French person, so he's a French editor, Jean-Christophe Bouzy, and he was asking, wait, so the mother of the couple, why is she so free? Why is she always in the house? You know? And then I'm saying, no, she lives there. And he's like, oh, wait, so he lives with the couple? And for me, this is interesting because I never even needed to ask myself that question. Like in Asia, we live with our parents and our parents' parents, and our, like, you know, we're like, our nuclear family consists of like 20 people, right? Yeah. And that for me was like a given, right? But I needed to explain to someone, you know, my French editor, that like, oh right, that's not how you know, that's not your situation. And so there's a disconnect, but for me it's a very interesting disconnect here, right? And how, like, even though, in fact, the more they are squeezed together in a small apartment, the more, you know, they don't have their own privacy. They you know, like the couple can only hug when the mom is out, and then the mom sees her son and the wife hugging, you know, when she is peeping on them. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you don't have space for yourself, you become alienated even to yourself, the more people you squeeze into it. This is really strange, but it's yeah, it's
there's like a urban suburban or like urban rural divide about this too, because I mean I feel like the more like for example Tokyo, like I barely know any of my neighbors, right? And but whereas I think a lot of the times if you're in more of a rural area where you necessarily have to get to know like the grocer and like all these other people, like, or if you're a farmer and you kind of go and exchange your produce with other people. It's like you do end up developing these networks and communities of people who like you don't necessarily agree with, but you kind of need to survive. Whereas in these like urban centers, you don't really need to talk to anybody to be able to live. You could just kind of like Uber eats your, way out of talking to people, and that's kind of the state of affairs. And I think that increases the depth of alienation that exists in cities, especially.
So I want to ask about music in both your films. You talked about DJing, but Neo, and especially in your film, the score is very prominent and sometimes it's very bombastic and it's very synthesized. When I saw it, it immediately reminded me of Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, which was, of course, composed by your father, Ryuichi Sakamoto. I'm wondering if his influence sort of wound its way into this film. I presume at the time you were also working on Opus, which was the film that you're doing for the final time. And since I also want to be fair, I do want to ask Siew Hua about the Mando Pop song that was in Stranger Eyes. It was,
The grocery store scene, right?
yeah, and then it sort of occurs at the end. So.
I want to give credit to Leah Ouyang-Roosli for them. Leah Ouyang-Roosli is the composer of the film, and they are actually much more influenced by Joe Hisaishi.
Yes.
Much more. And so, in talking about the music of the, just to tell you a little bit about the process behind making the music, we really talked about the feeling, we wanted the perspective of the music to be as if it's Ko and Yuta our age, like in our 30s, looking back at their youth. So to have that nostalgia and kind of retrospective quality to the music is something that we were really thinking about. But we also really agreed about loving just these huge melodies instead of having music or score that kind of blends its way into the sort of sonic atmosphere in an ambient way. We just wanted the music to just come in, And for me, I really love the use of music in that way, almost as like chapter markers or shots that you come back to. It's almost like the music that you come back to for each chapter, which delineates the structure of the film. So yeah, more Joe Hisaishi.
Right, so the music choice of Cai Qing, so the singer Cai Qing, and the song is called 不了情, which sort of loosely translates as eternal love. I don't know what's the final English translation for it, but something like endless love or eternal love. Endless love.
Yeah.
Right. So, this song, it's like it really, if you've heard Mandopop, you would have heard this song. Like, yeah, it's kind of timeless and from a generation that continues to exist up to this day. And for me, I grew up listening to a lot of old music like this, and for me it was even already old when I was growing up, because I think I forgot when it was first released, definitely sometime in the 80s. Yeah, but it has a lasting power, and again, this really taps into maybe the psyche of people who know Mando pop or Mandarin pop music, yeah. And I wanted a song that can kind of transcend this this generational gap, because why? There is the two characters in particularly to do with the song in the supermarket scene is to do with this older voyeur and this younger girl that he's stalking. And in some ways they never really ever properly speak to each other. Their communications, as I was saying, is purely mediated. And so they're even serenading each other in that way, right? So she plays her DJ music, and he's on the receiving end of it. And later on in the supermarket, he plays her his song to her, sort of in reciprocation in that way, right? And it has to be a song that's coming out of his sort of playlist, you know, his music, right? So it is something of his time, you know. But what is wonderful about Tsai Ting's piece of music is that it happens to also be timeless, and it kind of like it touches us all. For me particularly, you know, after I had the idea of the Tsai Ting song, there was no going back, and my producer was like sweating because like, oof, you want me to get this piece of music? It's gonna cost. Yeah, and I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I can't get it out of my head anymore. we need it, yeah. Finally, we managed to get it, which was a real ordeal, because the music was not only, the rights of the music was not only owned by one publisher, it was originally written for actually a movie a long time ago. So it was really complicated to get the final licensing, and we managed to get one that is of the original, the very old published, rather than the new remastered, nice sounding one. And I was like, great, you know, I wanted to play out of a speaker, you know, like the old one really touches me more, you know. So I think, yeah, we're just very blessed to have been able to get it at the end.
Vietnam also has kind of a recurring pop song. Right? I don't really know what it is, but does anyone know? I mean, it's also a great use of it.
I actually Shazammed it earlier in the screening.
And what's interesting about that song that comes out at the end is that I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think there's a Cantonese cover of it, which I am familiar with that tune.
Wow.
So what's
So it's, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, but it's by An Tu, and the song is called Oi Tin Yo.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the Vietnamese version, neither do I know which came first, but in some bizarre way it really transcended, because it hit me on a level that like, I know this. Yeah.
There's something about Asian cinema and like these pop songs starting to play, and like, people like watching each other. And, you know, I love it. I always love it. It always works.
Very true.
So unfortunately, I don't think we have any time for more audience questions, but I want to thank our wonderful audience and Lincoln Center and the filmmakers here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming and making the time. Yeah. Enjoy the festival.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm gonna get them to do a picture together.